We have our next speaker, and she's all the way from the US. And I know that, in the case of Alex, I think it's midnight right now. So, Alex, I apologize for the delay. We've had some technological difficulties. So, I really apologize because it's midnight for you. She's the founder and lead scale-up partner at ASA Incorporated, former co-CEO of PQ Incorporated, which they acquired. And based on the Mirror Review, she was one of those among the top 10 perseverant entrepreneurs for 2021. You should be able to, I would invite you to watch the videos of Alex on YouTube. She's quite popular there. She's very lovely to listen to. There's so much for you to hear and learn from her. And so we are very privileged to have somebody all the way from the US at midnight right now speaking and joining at this conference, speaking about entrepreneur to leader, how your growth is the key to a sustainable business. Thank you so much, Alex, for joining us. I'm just going to have to ask you to unmute yourself. Hang on, how do I do this? Give me a sec. Okay, there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for the warm welcome, Manjo. And it's wonderful to be back in Southeast Asia or in Asia in general, remotely. I have spent numerous years living in various parts of Asia. So super happy to be back. Despite, yes, being actually physically in Mexico, in North America, it's quite late. So thank you for everyone who's joined. I'm going to just share my screen here. Give a minute. Hopefully everyone can see that. I was going to present straight out of Canva, but it's being a little glitchy. So everyone can see that?
Yes.
Amazing. Right. So given that we are tight on time, I'm going to jump right into it. I'm going to maybe go a little bit quickly, but hopefully everyone's got pen and paper ready. We're going to run through talking about the journey from entrepreneur to leader and why your own growth is so vital to your organization's growth. And I want to start by saying just because you founded a company successfully does not mean that you know how to run one or that you have to be the CEO. And that's okay. And in fact, those two skill sets are actually really rarely innately found in one person. So why are we talking about this? Well, there is a ton of research that indicates that majority of company failures are related to people and organization, and leadership is a huge part of that. And I would say that it really does take, a village to successfully grow an organization, and it will likely be one of the most challenging, vulnerable, and rewarding experiences of your life if you decide to go that route. And curating a village and leading people's success, it really starts with gaining a deep understanding of yourself and the roles you excel at, and learning to communicate effectively and applying essential principles of leadership and team building. So this is a massive topic. And there's a lot of nuance, and it can take some time to digest. There's probably a dozen topics that I speak on and work on related to this. But today I really want to focus on, you, if you're in the audience listening to this, as a founder, as a business owner, as a leader, and really dive into your personal growth and how that relates to the success and growth of your business, and some things that you can reflect on and work on. And you are most welcome to follow up with me on anything you hear or have questions about. And I'll put my contact info is in the next slide in case anyone does have to jump off early. And then of course it will be at the end as well. So really quickly, thank you so much for the intro. Who am I to actually be talking about this? Well, after about a decade in strategy consulting, operations, and M&A, and before I made strategic growth and leadership development advisory my kind of full-time gig, I did spend a number of years leading, growing, and selling startups. And in 2021, as you mentioned, my co-founder and I were ranked top 10 Perseverant entrepreneurs. And what that really means essentially is we were relentless in up-leveling ourselves in order to up-level the business and not only survive, but actually be able to thrive in disruption, both technological and economic. And the short version is that recognition was when we successfully exited and sold our company. So I partnered into a digital reality agency, and we took a company that had grown, but not particularly profitable, which is what happens a lot of the time. And when I joined, most roles were being paid under market. We couldn't afford to pay me when I joined. The company was in a position where it just lacked a lot of the fundamentals to go to the next level. And during the first 10 months of the pandemic, we tripled in size. We were able to pay multiple six-figure exec salaries. We scaled up competitive pay for all team members, including all the new team members we brought on, added health benefits, et cetera, et cetera. And we made good on the strategic decision that we had made a couple of months prior to be acquired. So we had a successful exit. But it definitely was not all roses and sunshine. Some days I'm surprised that my co-founder and I made it out alive, let alone talking, still on good terms. And it was a lot of hard conversations and a lot of hard looks in the mirror and a lot of learning and flexing concepts into implementation and taking a lot of really difficult decisions. And as I've helped leaders and founders and entrepreneurs of various capacities over the past 15 years, I can say with confidence that leadership growth is a non-negotiable for successful, profitable business and growth. And also it will bring up all of your stuff. We'll keep it PG-13 here. It will bring up your insecurities and your vulnerabilities and, so many things. So it's wonderful and also very challenging at the same time. So this is a quick look at the evolution that happens as you launch and lead a company through growth. So a slightly more simple version is this. You typically will go through this. It's very hard. There are sticking points, but it typically starts with some sort of expertise where you're doing a lot. So either you are incredibly good at something you do, a service, and you outsell your bandwidth, and you need to bring people on to support you, or you hatch a brilliant idea and you decide you want to make a company out of it. Either way, you set up a company and you bring people in to help you deliver, which means now you need to learn to manage people. But it also means you need to learn about back office and support and all kinds of things to keep a company compliant. You have to worry about paying everyone. So suddenly you find yourself officially as a founder and a manager, and you're likely still delivering, not to mention everything else. And you're just wearing all of these hats and it can be really, really overwhelming. And what tends to be happening alongside of that is you're learning to be your own boss in a new way, because time management becomes even more difficult when everyone needs you. And if you don't get XYZ seemingly unimportant thing done, the company might grind to a halt. And also your team probably really loves and admires you, but you are most likely a bottleneck at this point. You're probably micromanaging certain things, keeping them disempowered. And this is the place where most people get stuck. So even if you finesse that and become really good at the manager who wears all the hats, it will cap the growth of your organization if you are not able to move into more of a leader role. And that is where you stagnate. As it was mentioned earlier, if you're not growing, you're either staying the same or shrinking. And a lot of companies do kind of fail. They run out of resources. They can't hit the size they need to be viable. So moving into leader role is really, really difficult for a lot of reasons. What we're going to focus on today. And it's almost a reversal process where you went from doing something and then doing everything, and you need to come back to where you define a role and you stop doing things and you enable others so that you can spend more time doing the most impactful work that you excel at, that moves the needle on the business growth objectives. And we'll come back to this, but because your growth is what I want to focus on today, but the couple of considerations in the mix when it comes to your business growth needs that I want to cover to help understand what we're going to talk about. And that is the fact that businesses need duality, what often is called the visionary operator or visionary integrator types. Typically, when an operator or another complementary leadership skill set joins a company, joins the team, this is actually when the company becomes more viable and it can scale faster. And this is because now you've got not just wild ideas, but somebody who can distill them into strategic initiatives. You have a backseat driver for the face of the company, and you have somebody who is capable of expanding on the value, right? So you have the face of the company, the charismatic person who has sold the core value, gotten things off the ground, and now you have somebody who can apply methodical focus to operations and revenue to achieve that vision. In the frame of founder and CEO, typically the founder is the one who has sold the core value, and then they need someone who can come in and help operationalize and mature in order to grow and enhance or achieve profitability. But the CEO can also be the visionary. And I think that's a really important thing that doesn't get talked about a lot, is there are a lot of different flavors of leaderships and C-suites and even CEOs. And the important thing is that the second person coming in needs to be vastly different from the founder to create that duality and cover all the needs of the business. There's also different stages of growth that require different skill sets. And there are some really famous examples we hear about a lot. So if you think of Steve Jobs, he's probably one of the most famous founders in the world, period. But also because he was removed from the helm of his company later to return to Apple with more experience, more management skills, and he grew Apple to the behemoth that it is today. So he led the company through multiple historic moments. And while he did step away at times, he was able to return and lead the company through a myriad of contexts and some really innovative growth. So it's a really great example where when we talk about that there are different needs of the company, it doesn't necessarily mean you need to have new people all the time, but it means that you do need to evolve alongside your business, which is kind of the premise of what we're going to talk about. That being said, there are some other ways that this can be supported. So Eric Schmidt was recruited to, I believe it was called Provide Adult Supervision to Larry and Sergey of Google. And thinking about eBay, Meg Whitman was hired to provide some really experienced leadership at a crucial point in their growth. And you'll see hiring sprees when companies go through big growth spurts, like Spotify did that more recently. You'll also see if somebody is not, if company misses their earnings or other strategic objectives, you may see some shakeups in the executive team. I think NerdWallet did that more recently as well. So you'll see a lot of different approaches, but what I really want to highlight as the takeaway here is that it's about recruiting talent who are growth minded, who will learn and grow and be able to adapt and be the chameleon that will champion what the company needs as opposed to their own comfort zone. So when you have key roles and you're thinking about your leadership, you really want to be looking for those flexible, growth-minded individuals rather than maybe some really inflexible experts, which, that being said, mentors, coaches, complementary experience can absolutely be brought in based on your strategy and your needs assessment. So just to make that clear, sometimes you have to make some hard decisions and shake things up. But overall, you don't want to be swapping out your leadership regularly, as it does destabilize your team, and people are loyal to people, not companies. So you want to try to find people who can bring a level of targeted expertise and knowledge as well as grow with you. All right. So coming back to why your growth as a business founder or a business leader is absolutely essential to navigating all the things we just talked about. We're going to break it into 3 areas today. And I realize I'm going a little quickly, but I'm trying to keep us on track. So if you're struggling to follow along, you can feel free to kind of reach out to me on LinkedIn, or I have podcasts where others share their experiences, which is one of the best ways to grow, is from others' experience. So if anything is flying by, I would be super happy to recap with anyone. But we'll talk today about self-awareness and humility that you need to curate in order to grow with your organization, and to do that without losing your audacious entrepreneurial edge. The second thing we'll go through is talking a little more about that leadership development trajectory, and we'll focus in on 5 key areas that you need to master. And then the last one is healthy mind, healthy body. The reality is you are not a robot, and taking care of yourself, it's not selfish, and it is in the best interest of the business, the team, your team, and your clients, and kind of why that's so important. So, all right. So jumping straight in, talking about self-awareness and humility, you need to drop the ego and maintain the audacity. So that entrepreneurial audacity is what made you believe it was possible. It's what got you here, and you're still going to need that. But what you cannot do is know it all, have all the answers, be the smartest at everything. As your company grows, you need to learn, you need to let go, you need to trust, and you need to admit mistakes. And honestly, the sooner you figure this out, the better you and your team will function. And the bonus is there's a lot of research that shows you'll also be a healthier, happier human if you work on this. So it doesn't just benefit your business, it will benefit your life and your personal relationships. You've got to have that self-awareness to recognize your strengths, your gaps, and your blind spots. As I said, leadership will bring up all of your things. And we all know that archetype of the boss that explodes when things go wrong and everyone's afraid to go in their office, or the person who, doesn't leave room for anyone to bring ideas to the table, or all of those things, or is so set on, one way of doing things that they miss out. So it takes a lot of work and humility to build the self-awareness to really see where your strengths are, where your gaps are, where you may have blind spots. And typically it's best with some kind of support, either trusted peers or external support. But what you want to be going for is a growth mindset. And I highly, highly recommend to implement 360 reviews and a culture of feedback in every organization. It takes time, and it can certainly be more challenging in certain cultures. But it will give you an external perspective from your team. It will create some of the things we're going to talk about later in terms of player teams. So we'll talk a little bit more about that afterwards. You've got to put in the work to grow and evolve as a leader. And this is a daily exercise. It literally never ends. But the great news is that it pays dividends daily as well. I like to talk about the power of strong leadership, which is what many people would call kind of a leadership energy. And somebody who is a strong leader is very clear on what they want, they communicate very well, and they allow space for people to ask questions to ensure that the expectations are understood. And people, when they understand expectations and what they need to do, and they feel empowered and supported, they're inspired. It builds really strong relationships, and it elicits a desire to want to deliver. So if you can lean into and cultivate that kind of energy, and we've all met those people, they have that charismatic, competent balance, and you just want to make them happy. You will elicit that from people. And this is not just within your team. This is clients, partners, vendors, really everybody. And the last thing we'll say is it should be self-evident by this point that you need to learn to ask for help, but it goes beyond hiring and delegating. It goes into just being aware of the tasks and your day-to-day and where your head's at, and knowing what tasks, ideas, conversations, decisions, maybe even time management, you need a little accountability support, really, really understanding what you need support on, and just not being at all hesitant to ask for that. So the second bucket that I want to talk about is your leadership development. We're going to talk about these 5 things you need to master. So we mentioned before that as you become a leader, you have to define a role. So to get out of that, I'm a manager wearing all these hats, juggling all the balls, you've got to define a role. And in order to do that, you really have to take a hard look at what your zone of genius is. And your zone of genius is the tasks and activities and thinking that you excel at, that you're really, really great at, that you enjoy generally to a fairly strong degree, and that are aligned and meaningfully impact the strategic objectives and growth of the business. So the things that move the needle in the business. And once you understand that, you can craft your role. You basically get to design your own role, right? That's why we all started businesses, was to do what we love. So you craft your role, and then you can figure out the complementary roles based on what the business needs. And while you may hold a lot of those roles early on, as you move into your zone of genius role, you start to fill those with other people. And the important thing I would stress is anytime you're bringing on a CEO, an operator, or another leadership skill set, you need 2 things. And the first thing is trust. You've got to bring on someone that you trust to do their job. They need to operate fairly autonomously and get things done. And the other is they need to challenge you. You do not want to hire a leadership team that everybody agrees on everything. That's not how you build a robust team. You need that duality in perspectives as well. So as you move into this role, you are going to need to delegate the tasks to other people. So you want to be moving towards as much strategic work as you can. And if you think of strategic work and tactical work on a continuum of the ratio, you want to be aiming towards 90% strategic work and about 10% tactical. And it will take you time to get there. But the way that you get there is learning to coach people to take over tasks properly so that you can actually let go of them, so that you are not the bottleneck that we mentioned earlier. And unfortunately, many leaders are bottlenecks and they are not aware of it. And they are not aware that it is actually toxic for them to be in every call and every meeting. And in doing so, they are not creating the space for their team. So once you do that, you're able to empower and enable your team, and they may surprise you. And we will not have time for them today, but some really awesome client stories of when this happened and the really wonderful surprises that came out. As a leader, integrity and vulnerability are really, really important. And I think integrity we understand, especially.
I apologize for interrupting. If you could wrap it up in 5 minutes so we could ask questions.
Absolutely, no problem. So we're much more in the public eye these days. People need to respect their leaders, and that's how they connect. But the vulnerability one is a newer one. And as a leader, you may feel that you need to, set the example in a way that is made really perfect. And actually it's the opposite. You want to admit mistakes and you want to not project perfection, because what will happen is your team will be afraid to make mistakes and admit mistakes. And then they will hide things when they go sideways rather than identifying them earlier and collaboratively correcting them. And if people are afraid to fail, they also may be afraid to try new things. So you might miss out on some innovation and new ideas. Uncomfortable conversations are the bread and butter of leadership. So that is going to be things like expectation setting. When you onboard new people, you've got to give them the recipe for success. You've got to tell people how to succeed in detail. And this isn't just deliverables. It's everything about how they are in the workplace. And don't assume they know. Even if you are hiring people with more experience than you, it might be a little awkward to have those conversations, but I can promise you 3 to 6 months down the road, if you are having a conversation about how they didn't meet the expectations you didn't tell them about, it will be more uncomfortable, not to mention expensive. Try to speed through this a little bit quicker. Accountability is another one. Part of enabling people to do things is holding them accountable. So that's having the metrics in place and regularly discussing performance against metrics and expectations. And the best thing you can learn in order to do this, beyond just having it be scheduled and operationalized until it does become culturally normal, is compassionate candor. The way to say the hard things honestly, with kindness and openness. And the last thing I'll touch on in this section is difficult decisions. So your day one diehards, they may not be the right people 3, 5, 10 years down the road. They may need to move on or move new roles. And if you are excessively loyal to these people because they were foundational to your business or they were friends before, you might be hindering the company. And in a similar way, I like to say you should only have A players. So you need to monitor performance, communicate, coach, and or terminate accordingly. And the mistake people often make is being too kind for too long, not actually handling the problem. You're not doing underperformers or the team any favors, keeping them in a role that they won't succeed in. It drains the team, it demoralizes the individual, and frankly, you're slowing them down from finding a role that they could excel at. So to wrap it up, healthy mind, healthy body. This is something that I think we're hearing more and more about in pop culture these days, but you're not a robot. You are an example. You will set the standard for your team, same as in many of the other things we talked about. And the reason this is important is you need to keep your container healthy in order to perform optimally. And there is more and more research linking our physical states and our emotional regulation to our mental clarity and performance. So beyond fitness, this means adequate sleep, some kind of mindset, coaching, therapy, meditation, whatever helps you be an emotionally regulated and mature adult, which we all like to think we are, but we all have our moments under stress where we may not be. And it's going to allow you to show up in those difficult conversations and have the introspection to grow. The last thing I want to say is hypergrowth is tied to innovation, and creativity happens away from your desk. your best ideas rarely happen while you're looking at a spreadsheet or sitting at a laptop or even in a meeting. So you need to make time to do the things that light you up. You will be more inspired. You will have not just the ideas, but the energy to implement them, and you'll be a better boss and a better human. And that is what your team and your clients deserve. And so again, this is somewhere where time and again, I've had almost butting heads with clients of mine around, taking time and things. And it has really led to great results and incredible results. So it's somewhere I'm always willing to go to bat with my clients. So what I want to leave you with is this reminder. Building a business is a huge undertaking. So if you're on that path, kudos to you. And wherever you are on your growth journey, the things that we talked about today, there will be elements that apply to that. So it's really essential when you're hiring and retaining an A team to be doing all the things you need to do to be the best leader. If you're fostering a culture of innovation, if you're expanding to new divisions, new markets, experimenting with new structures or remote offices, all of these things will really apply in helping that. So ultimately, this will also help you enjoy your leadership role and the growth of the company that you've really worked so hard for. So thank you so much for being here and listening. And I'd love to dig into this deeper. So I'm happy to answer as many questions as time permits. And you can reach me, as I said, by email or LinkedIn. I would love to connect, and I love talking about this stuff.
Thank you, Alex. That was very informative. And I learned a lot about leadership. Well, we have a lot of questions for you. I think this is the first time. We've got 5 questions. Normally it's just 1 or 2. We're not going to have time for you to answer everything. So I'm going to read them because I think the attendees don't get to see what are being asked. So I'm just going to read them. I'll choose one of the questions and then I have a question for myself, for you. So I'm just going to read the questions first. This is from a part of the audience. What strategies can organizations employ to engage and empower employees in this process? I'm not sure what that means. The second one is, can you discuss the balance between maintaining an entrepreneurial spirit and fostering a leadership approach? So I apologize to the audience that we won't have the time to have all of these answered. I'm just going to read them, but these are very interesting questions. Thank you so much for asking them. From what strategies can entrepreneurs employ to identify and cultivate the leadership skills necessary to guide their businesses through various growth stages? And then there's another one, how do you manage a conflict situation? And finally, what was one of your most difficult conversations in terms of coaching someone to be a better leader? Perhaps you could answer that final question there, in relation to one of your clients.
Final one.
What was one of the most difficult conversations in terms of coaching someone to be a better leader?
Gosh, had some pretty intense conversations. You know what? I'm going to refer to the last point I was making just because I think it's a really great one. And it's one that's a little different from what you might hear from other people, because I've had some tough ones, tough decisions, forcing people to prioritize and choose is always a tough one. People, entrepreneurs naturally want to do everything. So those have been some tough ones that I could say in general, but this in particular was a client that was, honestly, one of my most incredible performing clients in terms of the results and the growth in his business. But when we worked together, he was so accustomed to doing everything. I mean, this person had multiple jobs, had a family, his aspirations and goals were so lofty when he set them that I said, cool, let's give it 3 months. And then if we aren't moving, then I'm going to ask you to scale them back. So this was somebody who was a real high achiever, but he was going on a trip to somewhere he had lived, see a bunch of colleagues, and had a lot of social plans. And I said, great, let's pause next week and we'll regroup in 2 weeks. And then, I want you to kind of do X, Y, Z and let me know. This was about putting people in charge, giving him that space to enjoy the trip. And his response was, no, I'm not offline, this, that, and the other. And I said, I really would recommend that you actually use this time. You've got all these connections to make and you've been doing so much work. I really recommend that you take these few days and you actually pull back, give yourself some space, and you'll come back with a different perspective and you probably have some breakthroughs. And he was like, no, I'm taking a week off in March for, so-and-so's birthday. This was September, October. And I said, look, I really encourage you to do this. You know, I laid out a little bit of the rationale. I said, think about it for a day or two and let me know, but I could tell like, he was just like not having it. So messaged me a couple of days later and said, I thought about what you said. I am going to take a couple of days. I have so many social engagement things, took the time off. And so 2 weeks of, minimal contact, came back to the next meeting, and it was like a new person. And he said, I had the most inspired idea on the back of a jet ski of the new business model that we need. It was like everything we'd been talked about clicked into place. Yeah, da, 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 da. And that is what happens when you step away. The way our brains work, we collect all of this information. And when we're really in the crux of it, it's hard sometimes it's like when you're dreaming, you sometimes have these wild dreams because your brain is processing. Getting out into nature and creativity, or doing house projects, or whatever it is that is your thing, being on the back of a jet ski in this case, gives space for ideas and connections to form in a way that is not always straightforward and linear, which is often the way we work.
Alex,
And what happens?
I'm just going to jump in because I'm conscious of the time, and it's also past midnight for you. I just want to be able to ask my own question before you go, because before you go to sleep. You mentioned about dropping the ego and maintaining the audacity. And you mentioned the fact that there are different flavors of leadership. I get the sense that, we talk about drop the ego, in a sense, it's not helpful. You talked about Eric Schmidt, Steve Jobs, and so on. Now, in the US especially, we see a lot of businessmen with huge egos. Donald Trump being one of them, who is a businessman, the former president of the United States. Steve Jobs,
not a financially successful businessman. If you,
oh yeah, that's true. So you're a Democrat. That's good. Then you've got Elon Musk right now. Very huge ego. So the question I have is, when we talk about ego, would you suggest that in the smaller companies, dropping the ego is good, but when the business is big, ego is probably good? Or I don't know if you got that wrong.
Ooh. That's a tough one. I think there's two things. I'll try to be really efficient with this answer. One is what people are in public is not always what they are in private. And so if you work on yourself, you can flex the muscle of the face that needs to sell and be audacious and yet have graciousness and empathy and connection in the boardroom. However, the other side of that is this is where duality comes in. So a lot of the names you mentioned, alongside other famous names like Zuckerberg, etc., particularly the people who are technologically innovative, whether you want to call it neurodivergent or other, they tend to fall on a spectrum that does not always relate well to people skills, what we would consider innate. And while I do believe that anyone can learn and improve, this is why you often see partnerships of really, really different personalities. And this is often why someone who is exceptionally innovative and audacious may need an operator who is more of a team lead in order to help be the filter and the person that the team actually connects and thrives under.
Okay, so thank you so much, Alex. I know it's past your bedtime here in the US. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to pass on your name to, because with your permission, we're going to pass it on to the participants.
Absolutely. As I said, I absolutely adore talking about anything strategy, leadership, operational improvement. So would love to connect with anyone that wants to chat.
Okay. Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you.